My ex-wife Jenny murdered me on a Tuesday afternoon in Phoenix, but heaven made sure I got front row seats to her judgment. She thought a quick push down the hospital stairs would look like an accident. What she didn't know is that angels of vengeance get 72 hours to complete their first earthly mission. And every minute she stays breathing costs me another year in purgatory. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, sure, you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I've been watching her for 67 hours now, and she's already made 17 decisions that sealed her eternal fate. However, on the 70th hour, I couldn't take it anymore. I materialized right behind her at the Golden Palm restaurant and whispered, "Jenny, stop. I know the insurance money is tempting, but I really can't watch you poison David's coffee anymore, using my credit card to buy the arsenic. Even a demon would call that sloppy," looking at my translucent hands hovering over the restaurant table where my ex-wife Jenny Rodriguez sat across from her new boyfriend David Miller. I realized death had given me the worst job in the afterlife. The Department of Divine Justice headquarters looked exactly like a corporate office building, complete with fluorescent lighting and motivational posters about redemption. My supervisor Gabe, who insisted everyone call him by his casual nickname, despite being an archangel, had handed me a manila folder 3 days ago with the enthusiasm of someone assigning weekend overtime. The file contained everything about Jennifer Rodriguez. Age 34, real estate agent, resident of Desert View Apartments, Unit 237B, and according to the cosmic paperwork, my designated target for divine retribution. She had killed me exactly 72 hours ago by shoving me down the concrete stairs at Riverside Medical Center while I was visiting my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. The official police report called it an accidental fall during a heated argument between estranged spouses, but the celestial surveillance footage showed something entirely different. Jenny had planned my death with the precision of someone who sold houses for a living. She knew I visited Mrs. Patterson every Tuesday at 3 in the afternoon because I'd been doing it for 6 months since our divorce was finalized. She knew the security cameras on the 3rd floor had been broken for 2 weeks because her friend, Rosa Martinez, worked in hospital administration. Most importantly, she knew about the $2 million life insurance policy I'd never bothered to change after our separation. What Jenny didn't know was that I'd spent the last year of my life as an insurance investigator, specializing in suspicious deaths. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd become an expert in catching people who murdered their spouses for money, only to become a victim of the exact same crime. Heaven apparently had a sense of humor about these things because instead of sending me to eternal rest, they'd assigned me to the Department of Divine Justice with a very specific job description: observe, document, and deliver appropriate supernatural consequences to those who take innocent lives. The thing about being an angel of vengeance is that you retain all your human memories and emotions, but you gain the ability to see people's true intentions. Every lie appears as a dark shadow around their words. Every cruel thought manifests as a brief flicker of red in their eyes, and every act of genuine kindness creates a soft, golden glow that most humans never notice. It's like having supernatural vision that reveals the moral weight of every decision someone makes. For the past 67 hours, I'd been following Jenny around Phoenix, watching her navigate the aftermath of my death with remarkable efficiency. She'd attended my funeral wearing the black dress I'd bought her for our 3rd anniversary, tears streaming down her face as she accepted condolences from friends and family, who had no idea she was responsible for my absence. She'd met with my life insurance company within 24 hours of the burial, presenting all the necessary paperwork with the confidence of someone who'd researched the process thoroughly. But it was the small details that revealed her true character. She donated my clothes to charity, but kept my expensive watch collection to sell online. She'd posted heartbroken messages on social media about losing the love of her life, while simultaneously texting David about weekend plans to celebrate their new financial freedom. Most damning of all, she'd used my credit card to purchase arsenic from an online chemistry supply company, apparently deciding that David knew too much about her involvement in my death. The Department of Divine Justice operates on a simple principle: evil actions create spiritual debt that must be balanced through consequences. My job wasn't to torture Jenny or send her straight to damnation, but to create circumstances that would force her to confront the full weight of her choices. Some people, when faced with the consequences of their actions, find genuine remorse and seek redemption. Others double down on their wickedness and dig themselves deeper into spiritual debt. Angels of vengeance have access to a variety of supernatural abilities, but they're designed to be subtle rather than flashy. We can manipulate probability to ensure that lies are discovered at the worst possible moment, influence technology to malfunction in revealing ways, and create situations where guilty parties encounter the exact people who can expose their crimes. The goal isn't dramatic divine intervention, but rather the kind of poetic justice that feels natural even when it's anything but coincidental. Watching Jenny across the restaurant table from David, I could see the dark shadows surrounding every word she spoke. She was telling him about her grief, about how difficult it was to move forward after losing her husband so suddenly, about how grateful she was to have his support during this challenging time. But the shadows revealed her true thoughts. Calculations about how quickly she could access the insurance money, concerns about whether David suspected her involvement in my death, and plans for eliminating him if he became a liability. David, for his part, seemed genuinely sympathetic to her situation. The golden glow around his responses indicated authentic compassion, though I could also see flickers of uncertainty in his expression. He was a personal trainer who'd met Jenny at his gym 6 months before my death, and their relationship had developed quickly into something that felt more like emotional dependency than love. David had his own financial struggles, having recently lost several major clients. And Jenny's sudden wealth was undoubtedly appealing, even if he wasn't consciously admitting it to himself. The arsenic Jenny had purchased was currently dissolved in David's coffee, though she'd been careful to use a dose that would cause symptoms resembling food poisoning rather than immediate death. Her plan was clearly to make him sick enough to require hospitalization, where she could ensure his condition worsened through additional poisoning disguised as caring visits from a concerned girlfriend. It was a methodical approach that demonstrated both intelligence and complete moral emptiness. My 72-hour deadline meant that I had less than 5 hours remaining to complete my first mission as an angel of vengeance. The cosmic rules were strict. If I failed to deliver appropriate consequences within the designated time frame, I would spend additional years in purgatory before being allowed to progress to whatever comes next in the afterlife. Success, on the other hand, would immediately advance me to a higher level of existence where I could choose between various forms of eternal peace or additional service in the celestial bureaucracy. The weight of this responsibility was more intense than anything I'd experienced as a human. Every decision Jenny made was being recorded in what Gabe called the cosmic ledger, a supernatural accounting system that tracked moral debts across multiple lifetimes. Her murder of me had already accumulated massive negative points, but her ongoing deception and her plans to kill David were adding compound interest to her spiritual debt. The longer I waited to intervene, the more severe her ultimate consequences would become. But there was something else happening that complicated my mission. As I watched Jenny manipulate David with practiced ease, I found myself remembering why I'd fallen in love with her 7 years ago. She'd been charming, ambitious, and surprisingly vulnerable beneath her confident exterior. We'd met at a coffee shop near the university where she was finishing her real estate certification, and I'd been immediately drawn to her combination of intelligence and determination. Our early relationship had been genuinely happy, filled with shared dreams about building a life together in Phoenix. The transformation from loving wife to calculating murderer hadn't happened overnight. Jenny had always been focused on financial security, having grown up in poverty with a single mother who worked multiple jobs just to keep their apartment. When I started making good money as an insurance investigator, she'd gradually become more comfortable with an expensive lifestyle that stretched our budget. The problems began when my income plateaued while her expectations continued to grow. Our marriage had ended not because of infidelity or dramatic conflicts, but because of a slow erosion of trust and compatibility. Jenny wanted more than I could provide, and I wanted someone who valued our relationship more than material possessions. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The divorce had been relatively amicable, or so I'd thought. Jenny had kept the house while I'd moved into a smaller apartment, and we'd agreed to split other assets fairly. I'd never imagined that she was already planning my death while signing the separation papers. The memories hit me like a freight train as I stood invisible beside their table, watching Jenny laugh at something David said while poison coursed through his system. 7 years ago, she'd laughed the same way when I surprised her with tickets to see her favorite band at the Phoenix Theater. It's our 6-month anniversary, and I'd spent 3 weeks' salary on front row seats because she'd mentioned loving their music during our second date. That night, she'd kissed me in the parking lot afterward and whispered that she'd never felt so cherished by anyone. The transformation hadn't been sudden. Looking back through the lens of angelic perception, I could see the precise moments when Jenny's heart had started hardening. It began during our second year of marriage when her childhood friend Rosa got engaged to a wealthy developer who bought her a house in Scottsdale. Jenny had spent weeks obsessing over Rose's engagement ring, comparing it to her own modest band, calculating the difference in their wedding budgets down to the centerpiece arrangements. I'd tried to reassure her that love mattered more than luxury, but my words felt hollow even to me when she showed me pictures of Rosa's honeymoon in Tuscany, while we were planning a weekend camping trip to Sedona because it was all we could afford. Jenny had smiled and agreed that camping would be romantic, but the shadows around her words revealed growing resentment toward our financial limitations. The Department of Divine Justice had provided me with complete access to Jenny's thoughts and motivations during our marriage, and the revelations were devastating. While I'd been working overtime to save money for a down payment on a better house, she'd been researching divorce lawyers and calculating her potential settlement. While I'd been planning surprise dinners with her favorite takeout from the local Thai restaurant, she'd been fantasizing about dating men with luxury cars and vacation homes. The most painful discovery was that Jenny had started her affair with David 8 months before filing for divorce, not 6 months after, as I'd believed. She'd met him at the Fitness First gym on Camelback Road, where his Instagram presence and expensive supplements had impressed her more than his personality. David posted daily workout videos showcasing his physique and promoting various health products, creating an illusion of success that appealed to Jenny's desire for a more glamorous lifestyle. Their relationship had developed through a carefully orchestrated series of coincidental encounters. Jenny would time her gym visits to match David's schedule, ask for advice about exercises she already knew how to perform, and gradually transition their conversations from fitness to personal topics. David, flattered by attention from an attractive, older woman, had been an easy target for her manipulation. What David didn't know was that Jenny had researched his background as thoroughly as she investigated potential real estate clients. She knew about his recent bankruptcy, his failure to maintain previous fitness businesses, and his mounting credit card debt. She also knew that his social media presence was largely fabricated, with rented luxury cars and borrowed designer clothes, creating an image of prosperity that didn't match his actual financial situation. Jenny had seen David as a temporary solution to her immediate needs, someone attractive enough to make me jealous during divorce proceedings, someone financially desperate enough to be controlled, and someone naive enough to believe her version of our marriage's breakdown. She'd never intended for their relationship to be permanent. But David's genuine affection had proven useful for maintaining her emotional stability during the stress of planning my murder. The cosmic surveillance footage available to angels of vengeance revealed conversations I'd never suspected during our final months together. While I'd been sleeping beside her, Jenny had been texting David about her frustrations with our marriage, describing me as controlling and emotionally distant. She'd shared intimate details about our relationship that I'd assumed were private, turning our most vulnerable moments into entertainment for her new boyfriend. But the most chilling revelation was discovering that Jenny had been researching methods of killing me for over a year before actually taking action. She'd Googled accidental death insurance claims. How long do police investigate suspicious deaths? Untraceable poisons using incognito browser windows on her laptop. She'd even visited the Riverside Medical Center multiple times to study the layout and security camera positions, timing her reconnaissance missions during my visits to Mrs. Patterson. The life insurance policy had been Jenny's primary motivation, but not her only one. She'd also been planning to claim my pension benefits. I'll sell our jointly owned cabin in Flagstaff and liquidate my investment accounts. Her research had revealed that widow benefits would provide her with more money than any divorce settlement, especially since my income as an insurance investigator had increased significantly during our final year together. Mrs. Patterson had been an unwitting accomplice in Jenny's plan. The elderly woman's weekly medical appointments had created a predictable schedule that Jenny could exploit. Knowing exactly when I'd be at the hospital and which stairwell I'd use to reach the third floor. Jenny had even befriended Mrs. Patterson during casual encounters in the building lobby, learning details about my visits that helped her plan the perfect timing for my murder. The actual killing had been disturbingly simple. Jenny had arrived at the hospital 30 minutes before my scheduled visit, positioning herself near the stairwell exit on the third floor. When I emerged from Mrs. Patterson's room, she'd approached me with a fabricated story about needing to discuss our divorce paperwork urgently. The argument that followed had been entirely orchestrated. It's designed to create enough noise to justify the accidental fall that would end my life. Security footage showed Jenny checking my pulse after I tumbled down the concrete stairs, but her expression revealed satisfaction rather than concern. She'd waited exactly 90 seconds before screaming for help, ensuring that I'd suffered enough internal injuries to make survival. It's impossible while maintaining the appearance of a distraught ex-wife witnessing a tragic accident. The paramedics who responded had praised Jenny's quick thinking in calling for help, and the emergency room staff had been impressed by her composure during the failed resuscitation attempts. Dr. Patricia Wong, the attending physician, had personally comforted Jenny during my final moments, never suspecting that the grieving widow had orchestrated the entire scenario. Now, watching Jenny across the restaurant table from David, I could see her implementing the same methodical approach to planning his death. She'd researched David's medical history through his gym membership records, learning about his mild lactose intolerance and occasional digestive issues that would mask the early symptoms of arsenic poisoning. She'd chosen a public location for their dinner to establish an alibi, knowing that restaurant staff would remember serving them together if investigators later questioned David's illness. The arsenic dosage had been calculated to cause gradual organ failure over several days, giving Jenny time to play the role of concerned girlfriend while ensuring David's condition worsened. She'd already researched hospitals in the Phoenix area, identifying facilities with overworked emergency rooms where David's symptoms might be misdiagnosed as severe food poisoning or stomach flu. David's social media following would also work in Jenny's favor, as his audience would naturally assume that his illness was related to extreme dieting or supplement abuse rather than deliberate poisoning. Jenny had even prepared posts for David's accounts that would suggest he'd been experimenting with new fitness protocols, creating a digital trail that would support the narrative of accidental self-harm. But David wasn't completely oblivious to Jenny's true nature. His angelic aura showed growing unease about her behavior since my death, particularly her eagerness to discuss the insurance money and her insistence on keeping their relationship private until an appropriate mourning period had passed. He'd started noticing inconsistencies in her stories about our marriage, small details that didn't align with the loving husband she claimed to have lost. The golden glow around David's thoughts revealed genuine moral conflict about benefiting from my death, even though he believed Jenny's version of events. He'd suggested donating a portion of the insurance money to charity, an idea that had caused visible irritation in Jenny despite her outward agreement. David's conscience was creating problems for Jenny's plans, making him a liability that needed to be eliminated before he could influence her decision-making. As I watched Jenny reach across the table to touch David's hand in a gesture of false affection, I realized that my mission as an angel of vengeance required more than simply exposing her crimes. The Department of Divine Justice expected me to create circumstances that would force Jenny to confront the full spiritual weight of her actions, giving her one final opportunity for redemption before eternal judgment. The cosmic balance demanded that Jenny understand not just the legal consequences of murder, but the complete destruction she'd caused to everyone who'd trusted her. She needed to experience the same fear and helplessness that I'd felt falling down those hospital stairs, the same betrayal that David would feel when he realized her true intentions, and the same spiritual emptiness that came from choosing evil over love repeatedly. My 72-hour deadline was approaching rapidly, but I finally understood what heaven expected from my first mission. Jenny's judgment wouldn't come from external punishment, but from forcing her to see herself clearly. For the first time in years, the question was whether that revelation would inspire genuine repentance or confirm her permanent transformation into something irredeemably dark. The poison was working faster than Jenny had anticipated. David's face had grown pale during the conversation about weekend plans. Beads of sweat were forming across his forehead despite the restaurant's aggressive air conditioning. He kept shifting in his chair, pressing his hand against his stomach with increasing frequency while trying to maintain focus on Jenny's animated description of a luxury spa resort she wanted to visit. I could see the exact moment when David realized something was seriously wrong. His angelic aura flickered from golden concern to sharp silver fear as nausea overwhelmed him. He excused himself to visit the restroom, and Jenny watched him stumble slightly before catching himself on a nearby table. Her expression revealed pure calculation rather than worry, mentally timing how long the arsenic would take to incapacitate him completely. This was my moment to intervene. The Department of Divine Justice had equipped angels of vengeance with several supernatural abilities, but they required precise timing and specific circumstances to be effective. I couldn't simply appear to David and warn him about the poison, as direct revelation would violate cosmic protocols about human free will. Instead, I needed to create a chain of seemingly natural events that would expose Jenny's crime while giving both victims the opportunity to make their own choices about justice. My first action was influencing the restaurant's sound system to malfunction at exactly the right frequency. The speakers began emitting a high-pitched whine that made every patron cover their ears and look around in confusion. The manager rushed to address the technical problem, but the disruption had served its purpose, drawing attention to Jenny's table. Just as she was adding a second dose of arsenic to David's water glass from a small vial hidden in her purse, Chen, a nursing student eating dinner alone at the adjacent table, had been studying pharmacology textbooks while enjoying her meal. The supernatural influence I exerted made her glance up from her notes at precisely the moment Jenny was replacing the vial in her purse. Lisa's medical training allowed her to recognize the distinctive crystalline residue that arsenic leaves when dissolved in liquid, and her expression shifted to alarm as she connected David's obvious distress with what she'd just witnessed. When David returned from the restroom, his condition had deteriorated noticeably. His hands were shaking, his skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and he was struggling to form coherent sentences. Jenny immediately switched into her practiced performance of concerned girlfriend, suggesting they leave immediately so she could drive him to the nearest hospital. But Lisa Chen had quietly used her phone to photograph Jenny handling the vial, and she was already approaching their table with the confidence of someone who understood the medical emergency unfolding. Lisa introduced herself as a nursing student and asked if David was experiencing specific symptoms consistent with poisoning. Her directness caught Jenny off guard, particularly when Lisa mentioned noticing unusual behavior at their table during the sound system malfunction. Jenny's face revealed a flash of panic before she recovered her composure, insisting that David was probably suffering from food allergies and that she was perfectly capable of caring for him. But David's deteriorating condition made Jenny's casual attitude increasingly suspicious. Lisa offered to call an ambulance, explaining that David's symptoms suggested something more serious than a simple allergic reaction. When Jenny tried to decline this assistance, claiming she preferred to drive David to the hospital herself, Lisa's nursing instincts kicked in completely. She firmly stated that David needed immediate professional medical attention and began dialing emergency services despite Jenny's protests. The cosmic influence I was exerting began affecting the restaurant's security cameras, causing them to focus automatically on Jenny's table and record every detail of the interaction. The manager, still dealing with the sound system issues, decided to review the security footage to determine if the technical problems were related to any customer behavior. This seemingly routine investigation would later provide crucial evidence of Jenny's poisoning attempt. David was becoming increasingly incoherent, but he retained enough awareness to feel confused by Jenny's resistance to getting him proper medical help. Through his deteriorating mental state, he began questioning why she seemed more concerned about controlling the situation than ensuring his recovery. Lisa's presence had created a witness to Jenny's suspicious behavior, making it impossible for her to maintain the loving girlfriend facade while simultaneously preventing David receiving treatment that might save his life. Emergency medical technicians arrived within 8 minutes, and their professional assessment confirmed Lisa's suspicions about poisoning. The lead paramedic, a veteran named Mike Rodriguez, immediately recognized the constellation of symptoms that David was displaying. When he asked about possible exposure to toxic substances, Jenny insisted that David had only consumed restaurant food and water. But Lisa quietly mentioned her observations about the vial and the unusual behavior she'd witnessed. The paramedics began treating David for suspected poisoning while questioning Jenny more intensively about his recent activities and medical history. Her answers became increasingly inconsistent as she tried to deflect attention from her own actions while maintaining her cover story. She claimed David had been experimenting with new fitness supplements, but couldn't provide specific names or dosages when pressed for details. Lisa had remained at the scene, and her nursing knowledge allowed her to ask pointed questions that exposed holes in Jenny's explanations. When Jenny claimed David had been taking supplements purchased online, Lisa asked why he would consume unregulated substances when his social media presence emphasized natural fitness methods. Jenny's inability to provide coherent answers made the paramedics increasingly suspicious about the circumstances surrounding David's illness. The restaurant manager had finished reviewing the security footage and discovered clear images of Jenny adding something to David's water glass during the sound system disruption. He immediately contacted the police, who arrived just as the ambulance was preparing to transport David to the hospital. Officer Stevens, a detective with 15 years of experience investigating suspicious poisonings, took control of the scene and began separating the witnesses for individual questioning. Jenny's carefully constructed plan was unraveling rapidly. She'd expected to accompany David to the hospital, where she could ensure his condition worsened through additional poisoning disguised as concerned care. Instead, she found herself being questioned by police while security footage and witness testimony contradicted her version of events. The vial in her purse, which she'd forgotten to dispose of during the chaos, became the physical evidence that would ultimately destroy her. David was conscious enough to hear parts of the investigation unfolding around him. The realization that Jenny had deliberately poisoned him created a devastating sense of betrayal. Through his confusion and physical pain, he began remembering other incidents where he'd felt mysteriously ill after spending time with Jenny. The pattern became clear. She'd been testing different dosages and methods for weeks, using him as a laboratory subject while planning his eventual murder. But the most damning evidence came from Jenny's own behavior during the police questioning. Officer Stevens was experienced in reading body language and detecting deception, and Jenny's responses revealed classic signs of guilt and desperation. She contradicted herself multiple times, became defensive when asked direct questions, and showed more concern about the implications for herself than about David's medical condition. The cosmic justice I was facilitating wasn't about dramatic, supernatural intervention, but about ensuring that truth emerged through natural human observation and investigation. Lisa's medical knowledge, the manager's security review, and Officer Stevens' detective skills had created a web of evidence that Jenny couldn't escape through manipulation or lies. Her own actions had generated the consequences that would ultimately expose her crimes. As David was loaded into the ambulance for transport to Phoenix General Hospital, Jenny made one final attempt to control the situation. She demanded to accompany him as his girlfriend, claiming she had legal authority to make medical decisions if he became unconscious. But Officer Stevens informed her that she was being detained for questioning in connection with suspected attempted murder, and that she would not be permitted to leave the scene until the investigation was complete. The look of pure rage that crossed Jenny's face when she realized her plan had completely failed revealed her true nature to everyone present. The mask of concerned girlfriend disappeared entirely, replaced by cold calculation about minimizing legal consequences rather than worry about David's survival. Lisa, who had witnessed this transformation, later described it as watching someone's soul reveal itself through their expression. Officer Stevens contacted the hospital to warn medical staff about the suspected poisoning, ensuring that David would receive appropriate treatment and that Jenny would be prevented from accessing him during his recovery. The detective also arranged for the crime scene unit to process the restaurant thoroughly, collecting the water glass, the vial from Jenny's purse, and copies of all security footage that documented her actions. The investigation would eventually reveal the full scope of Jenny's crimes, including my murder and her systematic planning of David's death, but the immediate consequence was that her ability to harm others had been permanently eliminated. Through the convergence of human awareness, professional competence, and what appeared to be fortunate timing but was actually divine intervention, operating through natural channels, the interrogation room at Central Phoenix Police Station smelled like industrial disinfectant and desperation. Jenny sat across from Detective Stevens, her manicured fingers drumming against the metal table while her lawyer whispered urgent advice about remaining silent. Through the one-way glass, I watched her performance with the detached fascination of someone who'd once loved the woman behind the mask, but now saw only the calculated predator she'd always been. Her attorney, a sharp-dressed criminal defense specialist named Robert Hayes, had arrived within 2 hours of her arrest. Jenny had used my credit card to pay his retainer 6 months earlier, apparently anticipating the need for legal representation after my murder. The cosmic irony wasn't lost on me that I was posthumously funding her defense against charges of killing me and attempting to kill David. Detective Stevens spread crime scene photographs across the table, each image meticulously documenting Jenny's actions at the Golden Palm restaurant. The security footage had captured everything. Her careful addition of arsenic to David's water glass, her reaction when Lisa Chen approached their table, and most damning of all, her complete lack of concern for David's deteriorating condition. The detective's questioning style was methodical and professional, designed to give Jenny multiple opportunities to explain her behavior. Jenny's responses revealed the same pattern of manipulation she'd used throughout our marriage.
She portrayed
Herself as a grieving widow whose judgment had been compromised by overwhelming grief and financial stress. According to her version of events, the vial in her purse contained prescription anxiety medication that she'd been secretly adding to her own drinks to cope with my death. She claimed that David's poisoning was a tragic accident caused by her, mixing up their water glasses during her medicated confusion. But Detective Stevens had investigated hundreds of domestic homicides, and Jenny's story contained inconsistencies that only became more pronounced under scrutiny. The arsenic concentration in David's system was far too high to be explained by accidental contamination, and the deliberate nature of her actions on the security footage contradicted her claims of confused grief. Moreover, the detective had already contacted David's doctors, who confirmed that his symptoms were consistent with deliberate poisoning rather than accidental exposure. The breakthrough came when Stevens received laboratory results from the crime scene analysis. The vial in Jenny's purse contained pure arsenic trioxide, substance that required specific knowledge and intentional procurement rather than something that could be accidentally mistaken for anxiety medication. The detective also revealed that investigators had traced the arsenic purchase to an online chemistry supply company, using credit card records that showed Jenny had researched the substance extensively before buying it. Robert Hayes attempted to suppress this evidence by arguing that the search of Jenny's purse had been conducted without proper warrants. But his legal maneuvering couldn't address the fundamental problem with their defense strategy. Jenny's behavior throughout the investigation had been recorded by multiple witnesses and security cameras, creating an overwhelming pattern of consciousness of guilt that would be difficult to explain away in court. The detective then introduced evidence that connected Jenny's current charges to my death at Riverside Medical Center. Hospital security footage had captured her presence in the building 30 minutes before my supposed accidental fall. Despite her previous claims that she'd arrived at the hospital only after receiving news of my injuries, cell phone records showed that she'd been researching the building's layout and security systems for weeks before my death. Most importantly, Detective Stevens had interviewed Mrs. Patterson, who revealed that Jenny had visited her apartment multiple times during recent months, asking detailed questions about my visiting schedule and the specific routes I took through. The hospital. The elderly woman had initially thought Jenny was trying to reconcile our marriage, but she now understood that these conversations had been reconnaissance missions designed to plan my murder. Jenny's composure finally cracked when Stevens presented evidence of her financial research into my life insurance policy. Bank records showed that she'd contacted the insurance company multiple times during our marriage, asking about payout procedures and the timeline for claims processing. She'd also researched the legal requirements for beneficiary changes, apparently hoping to ensure that divorce proceedings wouldn't affect her ability to collect the money after my death. The detective revealed that investigators had discovered Jenny's internet search history, which painted a disturbing picture of premeditated murder spanning more than 18 months. Her queries included how to make death look accidental, police investigation procedures for suspicious deaths, an average time for life insurance claim processing. She'd even researched other cases of spousal murder, apparently learning from the mistakes that had led to other killers' convictions. But the most damaging evidence came from Jenny's own communications with David, which investigators had recovered. From both of their phones, text messages revealed that Jenny had discussed my death with David weeks before it occurred, describing it as an inevitable outcome of my reckless behavior and her resulting financial freedom. She'd even joked about my life insurance policy, referring to it as their early retirement plan. David's medical condition had stabilized at Phoenix General Hospital, and he'd been able to provide investigators with detailed information about Jenny's behavior during recent weeks. His statement described how Jenny had gradually isolated him from friends and family, encouraged him to depend on her financially, and made subtle threats about what might happen if he ever left her. Groomed to become her next victim? The hospital social worker assigned to David's case had also uncovered disturbing patterns in Jenny's visitor behavior. Security cameras showed her attempting to access restricted areas where medications were stored, and nursing staff reported that she'd asked suspicious questions about patient monitoring procedures and visiting our policies. Jenny had clearly been planning to complete David's murder during his hospitalization, using her role as concerned girlfriend to gain access and administer fatal doses of poison. Detective Stevens confronted Jenny with David's statement, particularly his description of how she'd encouraged him to create a will naming her as beneficiary despite their relatively short relationship. David had initially thought her interest in his financial planning was evidence of commitment to their future together, but he now understood that she'd been positioning herself to inherit his assets after orchestrating his death.
Odd.
Also revealed that investigators had discovered Jenny's research into David's background, including detailed financial records that she'd obtained through illegal means. She'd hired a private investigator to compile information about David's assets, debts, and insurance policies, treating him like a real estate investment rather than a romantic partner. The thoroughness of her research demonstrated the same methodical approach she'd used when planning my murder. Jenny's attorney recognized that their legal position was becoming hopeless. The evidence against her was overwhelming, spanning multiple crimes and revealing a pattern of predatory behavior that would be impossible to explain as isolated incidents or emotional responses to grief. Robert Hayes began discussing plea bargain options with Detective Stevens, hoping to avoid the death penalty by convincing Jenny to confess to reduced charges. But Jenny refused to accept responsibility for her actions, instead doubling down on her claims of innocence and demanding that her attorney find ways to discredit the evidence against her. She accused David of lying about their relationship to gain sympathy, suggested that Lisa Chen had misinterpreted what she'd witnessed at the restaurant, and claimed that police were fabricating evidence to close cases quickly. Her responses revealed a complete disconnection from reality and an inability to accept the consequences of her choices. The interrogation continued for 6 hours, Detective Stevens methodically presenting evidence that demolished every aspect of Jenny's defense strategy. Her lies became increasingly desperate and contradictory, creating additional evidence of consciousness of guilt that would strengthen the prosecution's case. By the end of the session, even Robert Hayes seemed convinced of his client's guilt. And frustrated by her refusal to cooperate with plea negotiations, as Jenny was led back to her holding cell, I could see the cosmic balance shifting around her. The dark shadows that had surrounded her words and actions were intensifying, indicating that her spiritual debt was approaching irreversible levels. She'd been given multiple opportunities to confess, show remorse, or demonstrate concern for her victims, but she'd chosen to maintain her deception and manipulation even when faced with overwhelming evidence. The Department of Divine Justice operates on the principle that redemption remains possible until the moment of final judgment. But Jenny's behavior during the investigation suggested that she'd crossed into spiritual territory, where genuine repentance was no longer accessible to her. Her focus remained entirely on avoiding consequences rather than acknowledging the harm she'd caused or expressing concern for David's recovery. Detective Stevens had gathered enough evidence to ensure Jenny's conviction on charges of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and multiple counts of fraud. But the legal consequences were only part of the cosmic justice being delivered through my mission as an angel of vengeance. Jenny's exposure as a predatory killer would destroy her social relationships, her professional reputation, and her ability to manipulate future victims, creating earthly consequences that reflected her spiritual choices. My 72-hour deadline expired at exactly 3:17 a.m. on Thursday morning. But I wasn't concerned about missing the cosmic requirements. Jenny Rodriguez had been formally charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and was being held without bail at the Maricopa County Jail. The justice I'd been assigned to deliver was complete. But heaven apparently had one final surprise waiting for me, standing in Jenny's cell, watching her pace frantically while cursing everyone who'd contributed to her downfall. I felt the familiar shimmer that indicated supernatural communication. Gabe materialized beside me, his casual appearance unchanged, despite the magnitude of what had transpired over the past 3 days. He carried the same manila folder he'd given me initially, but now it contained updated paperwork documenting the successful completion of my first mission. Jenny couldn't see or hear us, but she was experiencing the spiritual weight of her choices in ways that were becoming increasingly visible. The dark shadows around her had solidified into what appeared to be physical chains binding her movements and creating an oppressive atmosphere that even the human guards had begun to notice. Her cellmates had requested transfers, claiming that the temperature in her vicinity felt unnaturally cold and that electronics malfunctioned whenever she came near them. Gabe explained that Jenny's case represented a textbook, the example of spiritual justice operating through natural consequences. Her crimes had been exposed through human observation and investigation. Her victims had survived or been vindicated, and her ability to cause future harm had been eliminated through legal processes. The cosmic balance was restored, and my role as an angel of vengeance had been fulfilled according to departmental guidelines. But the most profound revelation came when Gabe opened Jenny's spiritual file, revealing information that had been classified during my initial briefing. Jenny Rodriguez had been born with the same immunity to supernatural influence that I possessed, making her aware of cosmic forces that remained invisible to most humans. Her evil actions weren't the result of ignorance or weakness, but deliberate choices made despite understanding their eternal consequences. This explained the calculated nature of her crimes and her complete lack of remorse when confronted with evidence. Jenny had known exactly what she was doing when she murdered me, and she'd understood the spiritual debt she was accumulating through her actions. Her immunity to angelic influence meant that my mission had required entirely human intervention to achieve justice, which was why the Department of Divine Justice had assigned her case to a novice angel rather than more experienced operatives. Jenny's awareness of supernatural forces also explained her research into David's background and her systematic approach to planning his murder. She'd been conscious of the cosmic surveillance that monitored her actions, but she'd believed that her immunity would protect her from divine retribution. Her fatal mistake was assuming that spiritual consequences always manifested through supernatural intervention rather than natural human responses to evil behavior. Gabe revealed that Jenny's case had been under cosmic observation for over 5 years, with multiple opportunities for redemption being offered through circumstances that might have inspired genuine repentance. Each time she'd been presented with chances to change course, she'd chosen to escalate her harmful behavior instead. My death had been the final test of her spiritual trajectory, confirming that she'd moved beyond the possibility of salvation. The most shocking revelation was that David Miller possessed the same supernatural immunity that Jenny and I shared. making him a natural ally in exposing her crimes rather than simply a random victim. His growing suspicions about Jenny's behavior had been enhanced by subconscious awareness of her evil intentions, which explained why he'd started questioning their relationship despite her skilled manipulation. Lisa Chen, the nursing student who'd witnessed Jenny's poisoning attempt, also carried genetic markers indicating partial supernatural sensitivity. Gabe explained that humans with these abilities were often positioned by cosmic forces to serve as instruments of justice when supernatural intervention wasn't appropriate. My mission as an angel of vengeance had succeeded because it had operated through a network of naturally aware individuals who could recognize and respond to evil behavior without requiring dramatic divine revelation. Murder had uncovered additional victims from Jenny's past, including a previous boyfriend who died in a suspicious car accident and an elderly client, whose will had been altered shortly before her unexpected death. These discoveries would lead to further charges and ensure that Jenny would spend the remainder of her natural life in prison, followed by eternal consequences that reflected her spiritual choices. David's recovery had been complete, and his experience had inspired him to pursue a career change from fitness instruction to victim advocacy. He'd already begun speaking publicly about recognizing signs of predatory behavior in relationships, using his platform to help others avoid similar situations. His survival and transformation represented the positive outcomes that balanced the cosmic scales disrupted by Jenny's crimes. Lisa Chen had been accepted into an accelerated nursing program specializing in emergency toxicology, her role in saving David's life having revealed a calling toward medical investigation. Detective Stevens had been promoted to head the department's domestic violence unit, his successful handling of Jenny's case demonstrating expertise that would benefit future victims. Even Mrs. Patterson had found peace through learning that her information had helped bring my killer to justice. Gabe informed me that my successful completion of this mission qualified me for advancement to the next level of heavenly service, but he also offered an alternative that surprised me. The Department of Divine Justice needed experienced angels who understood human psychology and could operate effectively in cases requiring subtle intervention. I could choose immediate ascension to eternal peace or continue serving as an angel of vengeance for other victims who needed cosmic justice. The decision was easier than I'd expected. Watching Jenny's downfall had been satisfying, but witnessing David's recovery and the positive changes in everyone who'd helped expose her crimes felt more meaningful than personal vindication. There were other Marcus Thompsons in the world, victims whose deaths had gone unnoticed or whose killers had escaped human justice. They deserved the same opportunity for cosmic vindication that I'd received. As Gabe processed my paperwork for continued service, Jenny finally collapsed on her cell floor, overwhelmed by the spiritual weight of her actions. The chains of shadow had become visible even to human observers, and the prison medical staff was struggling to explain her rapid physical deterioration. She would survive long enough to face trial and conviction, but her remaining time would be marked by the same fear and helplessness she'd inflicted on her victims. My transformation from victim to instrument of justice was complete, but it was also just beginning. The Department of Divine Justice had cases spanning centuries, involving killers who'd escaped earthly consequences and victims who'd never received vindication. Each mission would require the same careful balance between supernatural influence and human agency, ensuring that justice emerged through natural channels enhanced by cosmic awareness. Standing invisible in that jail cell, watching my murderer face the consequences of her choices, I understood that death hadn't ended my story, but had simply moved it to a different chapter. The love I'd felt for Jenny Rodriguez had died with my physical body, replaced by something more powerful. The absolute certainty that evil actions generate their own destruction, and that cosmic justice operates through ordinary human beings, who choose courage over convenience when confronted with truth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.